Maya never planned to bring her 6-year-old son, Liam, to work, not because she didn't want to, but because she knew how the world saw single mothers as burdens, as risks, as people who always had one excuse too many. But that Monday morning, after 3 canceled babysitter appointments, a fever that spiked overnight, and a voicemail from her supervisor reminding her not to miss another day, she had no choice. The rent was already overdue. The power company had sent another final notice, and Maya had spent the last of her grocery money on Liam's medicine. She stood in the cramped kitchen of their 1-bedroom apartment, staring at the bruised bananas on the counter, and telling herself that today, just today, she could manage it all. She wrapped her son in his favorite blue hoodie, stuffed his sketch pad and crayons into her purse, and whispered a promise that everything was going to be okay, even though nothing in her chest believed it. The office at Corvell Solutions, a mid-sized marketing firm that cared more about appearances than people, wasn't built for children, and she knew that. But Liam was quiet, polite, and too sick to cause trouble. She tucked him under her desk with his drawing supplies and a juice box, kissed the top of his head, and went to work filing vendor invoices like her life depended on it, because it did. But by 10:37 a.m., the hushed whispers had started. Someone from HR walked by twice. Her manager, Vanessa, frowned disapprovingly from across the floor. And by lunchtime, Maya was summoned into a cold glass office where 3 people sat on the other side of the table with stern expressions and rehearsed sympathy. "This is highly unprofessional," Vanessa said. "You've breached company policy." Maya tried to explained that she had no help, that Liam was sick, that she was doing her best, but none of it mattered. The word liability was tossed around like an accusation. By 11:12 a.m., she was told to pack her things. Terminated on the spot. No severance, no warning. Just a printed letter and a nod that might as well have been a slap. She walked back to her cubicle in a daze, her legs trembling, her breath shallow. Liam looked up at her with wide, confused eyes and whispered, "Are we going home now?" And she nodded, even though her heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces. She packed her things slowly, almost ritualistically, while other employees avoided eye contact. No one offered to help. No one asked if she was okay. She walked out of the building, carrying a cardboard box of her desk items in one hand and Liam's tiny hand in the other. And as the heavy office doors shut behind her, she felt something inside her collapse. Just the loss of a job, but the brutal confirmation that society had no place for people like her. Tired, desperate, alone. Over the next few weeks, the world grew colder. She sent out applications to every place she could think of, small offices, restaurants, call centers, only to be met with silence or polite rejections. The few interviews she landed quickly turned awkward when she mentioned she had a child. Employers smiled tightly, as if being a mother was a red flag, not a strength. She began skipping meals to make sure Liam had enough. She sold her old jewelry and some electronics just to pay rent. And yet, every night, she held Liam close, brushing his hair back and whispering bedtime stories with a smile she didn't feel. Because the one thing she refused to let him lose was hope. He never once asked why Mama looked so tired or why their meals kept shrinking. He just drew pictures, bright, beautiful sketches of superheroes and starships and smiling families. She would often find one tucked into her purse, his innocent way of saying, "I believe in you, Mama." One rainy afternoon, while Maya was sitting by the window with a worn-out laptop and a cracked phone, trying to apply for yet another job, she stumbled across a listing that felt different. Executive assistant needed, Stratwell Corporation. Family-friendly environment, growth, opportunities. She almost didn't apply. It felt too hopeful, too clean, too far from her current life. But something in her, a small ember that refused to die, made her fill out the application. She sent it off with a prayer and went back to making dinner out of canned soup and stale crackers. The next morning, her phone rang. A warm voice introduced herself as Jordan from Stretwell's HR department and invited her for an interview the following Thursday. Maya stared at her reflection in the mirror, touching up her makeup with trembling hands and silently thanking God for the miracle. On the day of the interview, she left Liam with her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rousseau, who was almost deaf but kind-hearted, and walked into the Stratwell office wearing the only professional outfit she had left, pressed and patched, but presentable. The reception area felt different. Not cold, not corporate. The receptionist smiled at her sincerely, not the forced, polished smiles she was used to. Jordan greeted her like an old friend, asking not just about her resume, but how she was feeling. Maya almost didn't know how to respond to that kind of kindness. Then came the surprise. "You'll be meeting Mr. Stratwell himself," Jordan said. "He likes to know who he's hiring personally." Maya's breath caught. Rayanne Stratwell, the CEO, a name she'd only seen in Forbes articles and business features. She was led into a sleek, glass office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. And there he stood, a tall man in his mid-30s with a quiet presence, sharp features, and eyes that carried something deeper than confidence. He shook her hand, invited her to sit, and asked the one question no other employer had ever asked her: "What's your story?" And something in his tone made her tell the truth. Not the polished version, not the bullet points on her resume, She told him about her son, about Corvell, about being let go, about how terrifying it was to choose between a paycheck and your child's safety. She didn't cry, though her throat tightened with every word. She didn't ask for pity. She just told her story honestly, the way someone does when they have nothing left to lose. For a long moment after she finished, Mr. Stratwell said nothing. He stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets, and then spoke words she would never forget. "I was that kid," he said softly. "My mother used to clean offices. She couldn't afford childcare, so she'd hide me in the janitor's closet with a flashlight and snacks. One day, her supervisor found out. She was fired on the spot. I remember her crying the whole way home. She thought she had failed me." He turned to Maya, his eyes suddenly raw. "But she didn't. She taught me what strength looks like, what love really means. And I promised myself that one day I'd build something better." Maya stared at him, stunned. He smiled, then not the smile of a CEO, but of a man who remembered where he came from. "Come back tomorrow," he said gently. "Let's talk about your first day." That night, Maya lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling with Liam asleep beside her, listening to the rhythm of his breathing and wondering if she had just dreamed the entire conversation. The words "come back tomorrow" echoed in her mind like a hymn, cautiously hopeful, painfully unfamiliar. After so many doors slammed in her face, after all the rejections and humiliations, it felt unreal, like her life had tilted in a new direction. But she was too afraid to believe in the gravity shift. The next morning, she dressed with care, tying her hair back, ironing her blouse twice, and packing Liam's crayons into her purse just in case. When she arrived at Stratwell Corporation, she was welcomed like she belonged there. Jordan from HR greeted her with a cup of coffee, a folder with her name on it, and a tour that didn't feel like a performance. It felt like an invitation. Her desk was spacious, polished, positioned just outside Mr. Stratwell's office, with a comfortable chair, a second monitor, and even a small plant already waiting there. "Rayanne said you'd like something green." Jordan smiled. Maya tried not to tear up. She met her new team, and to her surprise, they weren't cold or skeptical. They were kind, curious, and warm. During orientation, one of them leaned over and whispered, "If you ever need to bring your kid for a day, don't worry, half the team has done it too." Maya blinked in disbelief, her heart softening at the words she never thought she'd hear again. By noon, she had already organized 2 executive files, streamlined a logistics schedule, and noticed a gap in one of the vendor contracts that saved the company a few $1,000s. Rayan noticed too. He stepped out of his office, glanced at the contract revision, and nodded approvingly. "I knew I made the right call, he said. Then added, also, how's your little guy doing today? Maya's throat caught, but she smiled. Still a bit under the weather, but better. He loves drawing superheroes. Rayan grinned, then disappeared into his office and returned minutes later with a sketchbook. This one's for him. My son's all grown now, but this helped him when he was little. Tell Liam, I said, it's for special missions only. Maya held the book like it was made of gold. That night, when she handed it to Liam, his face lit up like Christmas morning. He hugged it to his chest and whispered, Is Mr. Rayan a superhero, too? And she didn't know how to answer because maybe he was. Days turned into weeks, and for the first time in what felt like years, Maya's life began to bloom. She laughed again. She slept through the night. She filled the fridge with fresh food and bought Liam new shoes with lights that blinked when he ran. She started waking up before her alarm, not from anxiety, but because she was excited. Every morning, Liam would help her pick earrings and tell her, You look like a boss today, and she'd smile wider than she ever had. At work, she became Rayan's right hand, organizing everything from investor meetings to charitable outreach programs. She started suggesting ideas, small ones at first, and Rayan always listened. He wasn't the kind of boss who spoke just to hear his own voice. He asked questions, paused before responding, and thanked people often, even when it was just for doing their job. Maya began noticing the walls he didn't talk about, the way his smile dimmed when someone mentioned childhood, or the way he avoided large social gatherings. One rainy Friday evening, when everyone else had gone home and Maya was finishing a presentation, she caught Rayan staring out the window in silence. Long day, she asked gently, not wanting to intrude. He turned to her slowly, eyes distant. Just ... remembering, he said. Today's the anniversary, the day my mom lost her job. Maya paused, unsure if she should say anything, but something in his expression welcomed truth. What happened after? She asked softly. He leaned against the edge of the desk, looking at her with that same quiet openness she remembered from the interview. She cried for a week. Then she cleaned houses, offices, anything. She worked 16-hour days. We lived in a car for a while. She used to hum lullabies over the hum of traffic, just so I could sleep. When I was 12, I started helping her scrubbing floors, wiping desks, folding linens. We never talked about being poor. She called it a transition, said it was temporary, and you know what? It was, because eventually she got a scholarship, got her degree, and built a career helping immigrant women navigate jobs. She passed away a few years ago. I used the last of her savings to start Stratwell, Maya felt her throat tighten. She must have been proud. Rayan nodded. She was. But I never got to tell her this every time we help someone here. Every mother we support. Every policy we rewrite to protect people. She's the reason why. Silence hung in the room, but it wasn't heavy. It was full. Thank you for not giving up, Maya whispered. If you hadn't. She didn't finish the sentence, but he smiled. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have met you. And then I wouldn't have learned that some superheroes carry sketchpads. They both laughed gently, the kind of laugh that feels like healing. Over the next few months, Maya's life transformed. Not just her financial situation, which stabilized quickly, but her sense of self. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, thriving, contributing. She started mentoring new hires, especially single mothers, trying to find their footing. She suggested Stratwell launch a Parents in Progress initiative support program for employees, juggling caregiving and careers. Rayan approved it. Instantly, he even asked her to lead it. She cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes before accepting. Liam, now healthier and happier, flourished at school. He told his teacher his mom was a real-life boss lady. And one day, he brought home a drawing that made Maya cry quietly on the couch. Was a picture of their apartment. Herself in a cape, standing tall, with a laptop in one hand, and Liam holding the other, both flying over clouds that said, "We don't fall anymore." One evening, as Maya walked out of work, Liam ran into the lobby from Mrs. Russo's arms and hugged her tightly. Rayan stepped out of the elevator just then, paused, and watched them with a softness Maya had only seen once before. "Man," he said, kneeling to Liam's height. "You keeping your mom safe?" Liam nodded seriously. "She's the strongest person in the world." Rayan glanced up at Maya and smiled. "I know." That night, Maya couldn't sleep, not because of anxiety, but because, for the first time in her life, she was thinking about the future with hope, not fear. Maybe she'd go back to school. Maybe she'd buy a house. Maybe she'd even write a book. One day, something to tell all the single mothers out there. You are not alone. People will try to break you for simply being both a parent and a provider. But there are still places, still people who understand that strength isn't measured in hours worked, but in moments endured. And the next time someone says, "You can't bring your child to work," maybe a CEO will stand up and say, "I was that kid." It had been a full year since Maya first walked into Stratwell with nothing but a flickering hope and the shadow of a past that had tried to crush her. And now, as she stood behind the podium at the company's annual Voices of Resilience Gala event she had helped conceptualize She almost didn't recognize the woman she had become. Dressed in a sleek navy dress Liam had picked for her at the outlet store. Her posture steady, her voice calm, and her heart wide open, Maya looked out over a crowd of executives, employees, families, and new interns, and began her speech, not with a polished quote or practiced line, but with raw truth. "A year ago," she said, her voice trembling just enough to reveal her soul, "I was fired for bringing my sick son to work. Not because I was negligent, not because I lacked skills, but because I chose to protect my child when the world gave me no other option." The silence that followed was deep and respectful. "I didn't think I'd ever find a place that saw my motherhood as a strength instead of a problem," she continued. "But then I walked into Stratwell, and someone saw me, not just my resume, not just my need, but my value." As she glanced toward the front row, her eyes met Rayon's. He was sitting with Liam on his lap, both of them beaming with pride. The sight of her son sitting beside the very man who had once been that hidden boy in the janitor's closet filled her with something beyond gratitude. It was purpose. "We often say resilience is about pushing through," Maya continued, "but it's also about being given a chance. One chance, one door opened, and when someone opens that door, the entire course of a life can change." She concluded her speech with a simple line, "We're not just building a company here. We're building a future that remembers the past." The crowd rose to their feet in applause, and Maya stepped down, her hands shaking, not from nerves, but from the overwhelming realization that her story had come full circle. After the gala, as the lights dimmed and the guests trickled out, Rayan walked up to her, with Liam still on his shoulders. "You were incredible," he said softly, his eyes reflecting the sincerity of a man who rarely gave compliments lightly. "You're changing this place." Maya smiled, brushing a tear off her cheek. "I think it's this place that changed me." They stood in silence for a moment, watching Liam run toward the snack table and joyfully stuffed mini cupcakes into his pockets. "You know," Rayon said, clearing his throat, "we've been talking about starting a foundation, something beyond Stratwell, focused on supporting working mothers, especially those rebuilding their lives. Scholarships, housing assistance, job placement, emotional support." He paused, looking at her intently. "And we want you to run it." Maya froze. "Me, Akuta?" she asked, not out of disbelief in herself, but because sometimes the most extraordinary invitations come wrapped in quiet grace. Rayan nodded. "There's no one better. You've lived it. You understand the fight, the exhaustion, the hope. And people listen when you speak. Maya, You inspire them without trying. For a moment, all the echoes of her past, every slammed door, every judgmental glance, every night spent wondering if she was failing, rose like shadows. And then they vanished in the light of this moment. I'd be honored, she said, her voice steady. Over the next few months, the foundation took shape. Maya named it the Liam Initiative, after the boy who had unknowingly carried her through her darkest days. The first program they launched offered free daycare services inside workplaces that partnered with the foundation. Another offered emergency financial support to single mothers fleeing unsafe environments. Word spread fast, and soon, companies across the country were reaching out, wanting to adopt the model. Maya began traveling, speaking at panels, consulting on policy, advocating for mothers who had been told to choose between their children and their careers. She told her story again and again for sympathy, but as a spark for change. Her voice became a force, not because it was loud, but because it was rooted in lived truth. One evening, after returning from a conference in Chicago, she found Liam sitting on the couch with a handmade poster that read, "Welcome home, hero." He wrapped his arms around her waist and asked, "Did you help more moms today?" And Maya smiled through tears. "Yes, baby, I did." In ways she never imagined. She bought a small home with a backyard where Liam could plant the superhero garden. He'd dreamed about vegetables shaped like lightning bolts and tomatoes that make you brave. They adopted a rescue puppy named Star. Maya even enrolled in night classes to study social work because she wanted to learn more, do more, be more. But through it all, she never lost sight of who she was. Before all of this, the woman standing in an office lobby with a sick child and nowhere left to turn. She carried that woman with her, not as a wound, but as a badge. Every policy she helped draft, every struggling mother she hugged after a speech, every email she sent advocating for workplace reform, it all came from that place, that truth, that fire. One winter afternoon, while setting up for a fundraiser, Maya received a call from Vanessa, the same manager who had fired her at Corvell. The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost nervous. "Maya, I heard about the Liam Initiative. I just wanted to say, well, congratulations. You've done something really amazing." Maya blinked, surprised. "Thank you," she said simply. Then, after a pause, Vanessa added, "I wish I'd handled things differently back then." Maya looked out the window at the snow falling softly, remembering the box of belongings, Liam's confused eyes, the way no one had stood up for her. "We all make choices," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "But I'm working every day to make sure other managers don't have to make the same one. Vanessa said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "You're making a difference. I see that now." After she hung up, Maya didn't feel anger or vindication. She just felt peace. People grow. People change. But systems only shift when someone is brave enough to speak up and stay standing when it hurts. Months later, Stratwell hosted a special event honoring the partners of the Liam Initiative. Maya stood on stage with Rayanne beside her. And as they introduced the next keynote speaker, a young woman named Anaya, who had escaped an abusive home with her toddler and now ran her own business, Maya felt the universe stretch and settle around her like a story that had finally been given the right ending. After the event, as the room emptied out and the staff packed up, Rayanne approached her with a quiet smile. "Do you realize what you've done?" he asked. "You built something permanent, something that will outlast all of us." Maya looked around at the walls of the building, the faces of the people they had helped, and then at Liam, now 7, bright-eyed and laughing with a group of other kids who had once lived in shelters, now planning a pretend superhero agency together. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. Rayanne nodded. "Neither did I." He paused, then added, "You know, I keep thinking about that day I first met you. How close I came to not being in the office that morning. It was luck for fate, but it changed everything." Maya looked at him, her eyes steady. "You saw me. That's all it took." And it was true. One person had seen her, not as a problem to be managed, but as a human being deserving of compassion, opportunity, and dignity. That one moment of recognition had changed not just her life, but the lives of hundreds, soon to be thousands. That night, Maya wrote in her journal, the same one she'd started during her darkest days, and scribbled across the last page in bold ink, "When the world tried to silence me, I found my voice. When they closed every door, I built one of my own. And now, when I look at my son sleeping safely in his bed, I know I didn't just survive. I rose." And as she closed the book, placed it in her drawer, and kissed Liam goodnight, Maya realized that her story was no longer about Pennant, was about power. It was no longer about what had been taken from her, but what she had built in spite of it all. And with that final breath of peace, she turned off the lights, lay beside her son, and whispered, "Tomorrow we rise again."